the world has to and is moving away from content-based verification as the paradigm. We're seeing an increasing shift towards electronic IDs. So think, portable digital identities, either from private issuers or from, public government issuers, where you're doing a multi-part verification and authentication through a device with a pass key that is known to be possessed by the individual associated with the identity. We're really seeing a lot of movement away from content-based verification to a lot of device-linked and portable digital electronic identity.
Daniel Flowe, thank you so much for joining me at the Human 0 Day. So happy to have you here. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So Daniel, we're here talking about humans and technology and identities. You are the head of digital identity for the London Stock Exchange Group. Seems like not a small position to be in, and quite an interesting one in today's world. Digital identities are changing, the way we think about identities changing, and that's where I want to start. How do you see the role of digital identity today, and what's happening in the space?
Well, that's a very broad question. So I think where I would start is we're seeing a massive change in how our governments, our authorities, and our regulators are viewing digital identity. So if you take a step back and look at the 20th century, there really wasn't a concept of binding a digital identity to a physical or a real world identity. That didn't exist, right? You had a username, you had a password, and most of the time, if you needed to open a bank account or assert your identity in some way, you went to a brick and mortar location, and a human being looked at your document and looked at your face and made a determination on the spot. There's a really famous Supreme Court case from the mid-1990s where the U.S. Congress passed a law requiring age verification for adult content. And the ACLU sued and went to the Supreme Court. And the findings in the case were that there was effectively no way for someone to digitally assert their identity at all. And the law was struck down as a result. So we've moved from a world where the internet and our digital selves were maybe like an accessory, and it's become a world where most of my transacting, much of my interacting, much of who I am and what I consume and what I do is done online. And our infrastructure hasn't kept up. So when we think about digital identity today, I guess the summary there is you're really thinking about workarounds. You're taking, the physical ID card you have in your wallet. That technology was 1915.
Wow.
The British created the photo ID because they were worried about German spies in the First Great War. So you're taking a 1915 bit of tech, you are digitizing it with a 21st century bit of tech that you own, and digitizing your face also with that user-owned piece of technology, and creating this kind of wacky workaround for a system that just doesn't reflect the way that we live our lives today.
Wow. So if you actually look at the evolution of technology, and if we look at the two capabilities, one of verifying identities digitally, so doing that matching, and then on the other hand, the technologies that are looking to circumvent these identities. Can you give me a brief overview of even just the last couple of years? What have we seen sort of in this struggle that we've been hearing about?
So, I mean, and kind of back to that concept of a lot of our verification is a workaround, right? It's almost all content based.
Yes.
So we're looking at voice, we're looking at biometrics, and we're looking at physical identity documents,
Mm-hmm.
and all of these are being digitized by a consumer device owned by that consumer.
Sure.
So you have a fundamental vulnerability because you're using content digitized and produced by hundreds of millions of consumers across disparate devices in disparate places to resolve that identity. And I would argue that we're already at a place where no one can trust user generated content without external validation.
Absolutely, absolutely, we've seen somewhat of the impact of this already. I think that there were some expectation that there will be a larger impact, especially surrounding the recent elections, which I think is just we're just it will happen. I just think it's a matter of time. Do you see the impact of this inability to trust digital media translating to the role of identity verification? Because we rely on this ability to verify identities so that we can automate a lot of these processes, like know your customer, as well as just simple logging in to different areas. What's happening there?
Yeah, so I think the world has to and is moving away from content based verification
Mm,
as the paradigm. We're seeing an increasing shift towards electronic IDs.
mm,
So think portable digital identities, either from private issuers or from public government issuers, where you're doing a multi-part verification and authentication through a device with a pass key that is known to be possessed by the individual associated with the identity. We're really seeing a lot of movement away from content-based verification to a lot of device-linked and portable digital electronic identity.
and so seems to me like that's a really big shift. I mean, we've spent what it seems to me like the good part of the last decade or even 2 decades, really improving on our biometric authentication systems to help reduce the friction. Do you see a world in which we stop doing that and we go back to this connection between the physical and virtual world?
Well, I think that the all of this has always been a workaround because we did not have that connection between your physical, your meat space identity and your digital identity. And what we're seeing is private and public options coming in that offer an authoritative binding of that physical identity to a digital identity. So I don't know that I don't think we're going to move backwards. I think that's a forward movement. But I think we're going to get more to, why does the government only issue you a physical document? Why is the government not acting as the verifier of my identity on the internet, just as they are when I show up at customs in Singapore?
Mm,
It's just it's just a place that the government is in the 20th century, and you and I are not, and that gap will close.
Interesting. And so you see a world in which governments come and look at the workarounds that we've built as an industry to help reduce friction in digital interactions by helping they have they have the source of truth, right? They are sort of the only ones who have the source of truth. And you're expecting them to come in and be able to productize that into digital workflows, whether it's e-commerce websites, any financial transactions, etc., and be a part of that real-time engagement.
So I would say not just governments, but certainly governments as one of them. But very specifically, I'm not expecting them to. They are. So if we look at India, So India started rolling out Aadhaar in 2009. So there's a biometric-based or device-bound electronic ID that is connected to a government-issued real-world identity in India. 1.1 billion people use it twice a month. We look at the bank ID is the big electronic ID in the Nordics. I think on average, Swedish citizens use it twice a day. SingPass, the Singaporean government has issued their own electronic ID. So it's not whether they're going to do it. There's 3 billion people on Earth that have access to it. What's interesting is it's not the Western world. So right, it's not the Western world.
Why?
So I spent a lot of time in Africa in like probably 15 years ago. And one of the most sort of startling things 15 years ago in Africa was there were no landlines. Right, the southern half of the African continent pretty much skipped landlines. They skipped home internet, they skipped landlines, and they had high quality mobile internet that was much better than what was available in the States 15 years ago in all parts of Africa. And I think we're seeing where very similarly, there's a lot of economies are just skipping. If you're India, for example, and it's 2009 and you don't have a national identity card, do you create a physical identity card or do you create a digital identity? And so, we look at India, they just skipped a national ID card and went directly to digital.
Wow. Okay. So it's a fascinating. Do you see big risks with this construct that linking the electronic ID to a physical ID in such a robust way? I mean, what are the ways for abuse here?
And there are risks. And don't let anybody tell you any different. So I think there's a couple of risks. One is, you've got a government creating sort of the ultimate honeypot. And that is a risk. We've seen where like the CPF database in Brazil has already been breached a couple of times. And that's we've got every Brazilian national's PII is all in one place in a structured format.
Right.
And that keeps me up at night. And I think the other big piece of this is how much do you trust your government?
Right.
Because the opportunities for surveillance, for abuse, are very real. You're letting the government into a part of your life that most of us have grown used to a fair degree of anonymity in. So there's certainly a question about how much do you trust your government.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, then the honeypot use case. I think it's a big one from a cybersecurity perspective. But I can only imagine that, given that as he centralize that, then there's also a bigger opportunities for better security and better defensive systems. Yet it's an interesting game. And obviously, I don't think there's so much that we can talk about in this space. We only pretty much highlighted some of the topics that need to be dove into. Very quickly, what do you see as the role of generative AI and deepfakes over the next couple of years playing out in the world of digital identity?
I mean, I think we're just going to see a continued acceleration. Like you mentioned, there was much sort of weeping and gnashing of teeth about the U.S. election and the vulnerabilities there that didn't really manifest, thankfully, this go round. But I read somewhere recently that they estimate there's 20 developers using generative AI maliciously for every one using generative AI to protect and defend.
Wow.
And I don't know how accurate that is, but it feels about right.
Feels accurate.
And to me, that just becomes an inevitability. So it's not if uh, generative AI reaches the point that content-based verification can no longer be trusted. It's when, and we need to start moving towards alternate means to bind your digital identity to your physical one and to
Right.
verify it.
Right, and I think we've seen now also companies like World Orb, I believe, by Sam Altman, also
Mhm.
coming in and playing in this game. Daniel, one thing you're most excited about for the future of digital identities?
So one thing I'm most excited about, and we didn't get to talk about, um, is inherent bias in a lot of the tools that we use today.
Ah,
Um, so what I'm most excited about is some of these movements towards centralized identity verification are really going to help vulnerable populations and disenfranchised people.
right.
So when you look at the algorithms that we use for facial recognition, when you look at the data sets that they're trained on, they are predominantly white and male. So you see crazy numbers out there, like some of the facial verification softwares have like a 0.2, 0.3% error rate on a white man and like a 34% error rate on a dark skinned woman. Because again, we're utilizing workarounds. And those workarounds are trained on data sets that were scraped from publicly available photos, which are, largely politicians and government figures. So you've got this data set. I think the main data set, LFW, that's used to train facial matching algorithms is like 70 some percent male and 80 some percent white.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's just overwhelmingly biased. So no matter what kind of corrections you put in place and fences you put in place around an algorithm that's trained on a data set that lopsided, you just end up with tremendously poor performance across darker skinned people, non-Caucasian ethnicities, and women. So when we start talking about moving to a more centrally managed, structured means of digital identity verification, you do away with a lot of that because we've no longer got a private party that used a publicly available data set to train its algorithm. You're moving to like NIST has actually demographically representative data sets available to train facial recognition software or algorithms. So the removal of bias and the introduction of equity globally is something that I am tremendously excited about.
Sounds incredibly important and incredibly impactful. Daniel, I really want to thank you for your time. Thank you so much for just even giving me a brief introduction into this world of yours, which sounds fascinating. And wishing you and all of us best of luck with this important endeavor. It's a big one for us. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael. It's great to meet you, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much.